So general box cutter use is you click and drag to create your shape. When you release, you're able to then begin the extrusion process. I'm using Boxcutter 717.17, so I don't have the extrusion lock, so it feels a little weird. However, once you click, the operation is complete. We introduced an option called release lock, where whenever you have it enabled, it actually breaks the operation into steps. So you can click and drag to create your 2D shape. You can take a moment to just look around it. You can even shift, click, and drag the center dot in order to move it around. You can drag the blue dot in order to go from a chamfer, bring it in, turn it into a bevel, bring it back out, turn it into a chamfer, drag this dot and perform the extrusion, and then click and apply. So it's a more step-based process for people who want to just step through the operations. However, shift clicking it also opens up a expansive sub palette where we added an option called repeat lock. Whenever repeat lock's on, that means that whenever you draw a shape, so I'm drawing just a center drawn shape here, and now whenever I repeat, it will drop that shape in a state that's paused. So I can actually shift drag this dot in order to move the shape around. I could repeat this again, shift drag this dot in order to reposition it. I could repeat here, shift drag this dot to reposition it, just because I dropped it into this kind of pause mode whenever I did repeat. So it comes in handy for times where you want to do something like this. It's a little strange with the transform of this dot. I'll have to check into that. But whenever you're repeating like this and it's paused, you can also do things like, say, rotate and press G, move it over, press V, array it, and do all the things you would normally do with a piece of paused geometry. However, the thing about repeat lock is that once you use it repeatedly in 2.93, it would actually deselect your current selection. So this is something that I'm unable to replicate here, so it's actually making me look like a fool. However, if we jump over to the latest version of Blender, I'm also happy to announce that repeat lock is no longer a situation with us having the mesh get deselected. You might have saw it in my previous demo, but now if I were to come in and repeat this, we see that while it's able to repeat fine and dandy, it's also coming in and keeping the mesh selected, which is an important thing for repeating fluidly over and over without any sort of issue standing in the way, like you having to stop and double click to select something. In fact, there's not even a need for me to work with repeat lock on, since I'm working in such a linear fashion. I could actually just keep double clicking and keep adding repeat points at this point. So repeat is one of those things that we started improving over the last version. It continues getting better. Also, before we move on to the next thing from repeat, one more thing. So I'm going to press Control Z until I undo all the cuts that I made, and I'm just back at the first one that I started with. And I will select this point and this point and press J to put a vert in between in edit mode. We'll press Alt V and turn on wireframe just so we can see our wireframe. And now what I want to do is turn off grid and use snap dots in order to repeat precisely in this area. Just placing one of these parts in between, but just letting you know that we also now support orientation modes, which is part of Shift V. In fact, whenever you're using certain things like dots will now take advantage of nearest edge if you're precisely on top of an edge, even if you're inside of local, really expanding its usefulness a bit. In fact, you can see that the more shapes I add, I have quite a few dots on screen, and they're also a little large, but that's something that's adjustable in preferences, but we'll be going more over that later. So alternatively, if I were to try that same thing on this edge, we can see that the repeat stroke is actually aligned to it as well. Just double clicking and waiting for it to appear. And just like that, we can continue subdividing inside of an edge with repeat. However, in the future, I do hope that we are able to add subdivision to dots, but that's a talk for another day. So with that, we can now jump on to the next section. In the previous version of Blender, along with the previous version of Boxcutter, let's try that same thing with getting it to orient. So we just perform the same edge across, and I'll press Shift V and we'll set this to nearest edge. And the first thing I'll do is draw a box, but I'll hold Alt so I get center draw, and then we'll press spacebar, and let's activate snapping and just control click, and we see that while it also deselected because of the rotation lock, or the repeat lock, let's turn that off. We also see that it wasn't able to orient it to this edge, even though we had it set to nearest edge. In fact, if we shift V and jumped it over to longest edge, we see that none of these settings actually take effect, and really it's the responsibility of the dot to provide the rotation information for the repeat that we're doing here. So this is precisely what we're trying to fix from what we were showing in the last slide.